People collect all kinds of things. Stamps, autographs, Pokemon cards. Rolf Dobelli collects biases and fallacies, and he has more than 100 in his collection. He presents some of those to us in his book, The Art of Thinking Clearly, and today we're going to have a look at that. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung and I welcome you to another book review. Today we're going to have a look at Rolf Dobelli's The Art of Thinking Clearly. Dobelli is primarily an author, but he has done plenty of things. In 2008, he founded the organization World.Minds, I suppose it is phrased like that, which is a non-profit organization that deals with exchange of knowledge. In 1999, he founded the company GetAbstract together with some friends. GetAbstract is one of those companies where you can get short summaries of books for a price. They focus on books about economics and on literary classics. Nowadays, there are plenty of companies who provide summaries, but I think GetAbstract was one of the first ones. It is a Swiss company, but its main market is the US, so maybe some of you know it. Dobelli also acted as a host for TV and online shows. He hosted a program on a show on economics on Bloomberg Television, and for the Swiss NZZ Online he hosted a show about books. And he is a writer. He started writing and publishing novels, but it didn't go that well. I mean, it is already quite an impressive feat to have a novel published, let alone a couple of novels, but they didn't sell excessively well. And then Dobelli stumbled upon the topic of biases and fallacies. In the introduction of The Art of Thinking Clearly, he says it happened when he met Nassim Taleb and discussed the topic with him. Then he started writing columns for some newspapers about biases and fallacies, among others the German FAZ, Frankfurt newspaper that is one of the most well-known ones. And those biases and fallacies he presented in those columns, he later collected in this book, The Art of Thinking Clearly. The German edition was published in 2011, the English edition later in 2013. And here, Dobelli presents 52 different biases and fallacies. He wrote another German book, a sequel to that one, which is called Die Kunst des klugen Handelns, literally The Art of Acting Wisely, which is a direct sequel to this one, and it presents another 52 biases and fallacies. However, this one has unfortunately not been translated into English, so I will focus on this book in the video. However, if you know German or if the book is available in any language you understand, I should note that this sequel is available as well. In Germany, the book was rather successful. There were a couple of prints. And in the most recent German editions, there is also an additional workbook section included. The one that is printed in blue here, not that visible, I think. But unfortunately, this also isn't available in English. So let's talk about the biases and fallacies. As I said, a total of 52 are presented in here, and they all have their own small chapter. As an example, I will show you the sunk cost fallacy, which I already presented in a video, so some of you will already know about it. It has its own small chapter. It is 3 pages in total, where Dobelli presents this fallacy. It starts, of course, with the title, which is phrased as a question, why you should forget the past. And as a subtitle, we have the actual name, sunk cost fallacy. Now, at first, in this small chapter, Dobelli tells us about some examples from his personal life, such as one time he was at the cinema with his wife, and he had to sit through the boring movie because his wife insisted, because she said the tickets were so expensive, we have to watch it. And he tells us about a friend of his who is in a very bad relationship with a woman who has cheated on him numerous times. And each time he has taken her back because he says, I put so much effort into this relationship, I can't end it. After those introductory examples, Dobelli provides a general explanation of this fallacy. He says we always have to make decisions under uncertainty because we never know how things will turn out, and one option always is to abandon a venture, to abandon a project if the outlook is grim. And this is where the sunk cost fallacy kicks in. We encounter it whenever we say, but I have already invested so much money, time, effort, whatever into this, I can't stop now. And the sunk cost fallacy usually leads us to bad decisions. After this general definition, Dobelli provides another example, which is about stock market traders, investors who sometimes tend to sell shares that are doing well, that are raising in value, instead of shares that are doing badly, that are below the price they originally paid for them, because they don't want to realize the loss. Dobelli also talks about the causes for this fallacy. He says it is because we want to appear consistent, we want to stick and stay true to our original decisions, which, to be precise, actually refers more to the commitment bias. However, those two are so similar that there often is no distinction between them, that they are dealt with in one go, so this is all right. Dobelli also tells us the story of the Concorde, which is a very common example for the sunk cost fallacy, and it is even sometimes called Concorde effect. At the very end, there is a short conclusion where Dobelli says there are plenty of good reasons to continue a project, to see something through to the end, but there is a very bad reason, and that is to consider the sunk costs, to consider earlier investments, even though they are in the past and irreversible, and you never get them back either way. Now, of course, the chapters are always structured a bit differently, depending on the specific bias or fallacy Dobelli talks about, but this should give you a general idea of how these short explanations work. Now, since we have so many biases and fallacies in one book, 52, you might wonder how well Dobelli distinguishes what is a bias or fallacy and what is not. Here, first, we have to take into consideration that in German, Dobelli uses the term Denkfehler, literally thinking error, which is not as specific as biases and fallacies. So it is a bit more vague to begin with, and Dobelli isn't that strict in distinguishing. Topics he has included in the book as thinking errors are, among others, Induction, The Tragedy of the Commons, Exponential Growth, and Social Loafing. And all of those I wouldn't really consider thinking errors, certainly not biases or fallacies. At least it is debatable. To give you a specific example, induction, we already had a video about this one as well. Induction is a way of drawing conclusions. It means to infer from the specific to the general. For example, I know that chocolate is tasty, that Joe is nice and helpful, that hard work pays off, that I shouldn't walk around looking at my mobile phone in public because I might get hurt. Now, all of those I didn't learn from books, I didn't learn from YouTube tutorials, I learned from experience. I tried different types of chocolate, they all tasted nice, so I concluded chocolate is tasty in general. And I probably had a bad experience walking around looking at my phone, so I concluded that it would be better to stop doing that. However, induction can also lead us astray because it only provides clues and hints about how the real world works. It never provides definitive proof. However, we often act as though as it did. Dobelli quotes one common German phrase that is quite stupid and dangerous, which goes about like this: I've done this 100 times and never did anything bad happen, so it is fine or whatever. And yeah, this is a bad idea, this won't end well. Taleb also is quite critical of induction in The Black Swan. He gives a classic example, a story of a turkey who says, "Oh, humans are so nice. They feed me every day. They clean my cage. Humans are great." And then there is a pretty nasty surprise in store for him on Thanksgiving. So induction can certainly lead us astray, but I still wouldn't classify it as a thinking error. However, I am fine with the way Dobelli does things here, because this is clearly not supposed to be some academic encyclopedia of biases and fallacies, clearly not, but it is a popular science book about situations where we are likely to make bad decisions. And in that context, I am perfectly fine with this selection, with not distinguishing that strictly. It's also difficult to distinguish between individual biases and fallacies. As I mentioned before, the sunk cost fallacy and commitment bias are often not distinguished between, and Dobelli doesn't do it either. And there are probably other cases where he could have summarized two similar biases and fallacies in one chapter, but he did not. But I think it's fine as he did it. There is no example that I really find problematic here. One thing that is great about such a book, about such a compilation of plenty of biases and fallacies, is the references, the list of literature and sources, etc. that Dobelli used to do the research for this book. Because there we find lots of relevant sources to all of those different biases and fallacies. Dobelli used a wide range of sources. Often the original source is included, the source where the bias or fallacy was first discovered, first named, and so on. So this is quite helpful. And the big advantage is that the references are not just one plain list of all the books he used, but the list is sorted by the biases and fallacies they refer to. So you can look up the sources he used for one specific bias or fallacy and then do your own research, and this is quite helpful for me. Dobelli also has his personal favorites. One person he likes to quote is Nassim Taleb. He also mentioned in the introduction. He often refers to Taleb's Black Swan and to other books of his. And another personal favorite of Dobelli is Charlie Munger, the investor and vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway and friend of Warren Buffett. He frequently quotes him or refers to his book Poor Charlie's Almanac. Let's proceed to the critique. We have to be aware that this is kind of second-hand knowledge. Dobelli didn't do any own research on biases or fallacies, didn't come up with any own ideas or hypotheses, but he just read the existing literature, collected those biases and fallacies, and created this compilation, which is fine, and the resulting book is quite good, quite helpful. So this is, of course, fine. And it is quite a helpful book with a wide range of topics. Due to the nature of the book, I would, by the way, recommend getting it as an ebook. Now, usually when I have an ebook, I will use an ebook reader. However, here I also frequently use the desktop application to quickly look something up or find some reference or whatever. So this is quite useful from my point of view. One advantage this book certainly has is that it is very easy to understand, quite comprehensible, fun and easy to read, and I'd say it is much easier to comprehend than, for example, Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow or Taleb's Black Swan. So here Dobelli clearly has a small advantage. Let's talk a bit about this specific edition. This one is the UK edition. There are different editions for the UK and the US. The US one looks similar, though it also has a rather plain cover that has just text and no image. What I like about this edition is that it is a bit bigger than the German one. The German one is rather small and rather thick, which I don't like that much, so here I prefer this English one. However, it has a big disadvantage. It doesn't have any images, while the German edition has plenty. In the German edition, there is a small illustration for each single bias or fallacy, so the book has more than 50 colored illustrations, which is quite nice. Unfortunately, the English edition doesn't have that. One small goodie the English edition has, the German version does not, is at the end of each chapter there is a short section "See Also," where you are referred to other biases and fallacies that are similar and the pages you can find them on. Overall, I'd say this book is perfectly fine. The text is big and easy to read. The book is nice. The cover, of course, is a matter of taste. It's somewhat plain, but I'm fine with it. So this is fine. However, as I said before, I would recommend getting it as an ebook. And overall, I certainly recommend the book. It is quite nice and useful. It is a good way to learn about plenty of biases and fallacies in a relaxed and easy and comprehensible way. Of course, I will also present more biases and fallacies here on the channel because I like to collect them as well. I also enthusiastically collect likes and subscriptions, so if you don't mind, I would be quite happy. We will see each other again next week in the next channel update. For today, I take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.